Hi, welcome to Plato's Cave, your speakeasy for ideas, where Tom and Dave show us how to think like the American founders. Grab a drink if you'd like. The conversation about saving our republic is about to begin.
Well, Dave, we just wrapped up a kind of a solemn holiday. It's Memorial Day weekend, day to remember soldiers who have fallen in the service of the United States. But it's also, a lot of people look at it, it's the beginning of summer. Did you do anything enjoyable?
A little bit of each.
Yeah.
I was moving this weekend. I spent Memorial Day itself actually moving out of my condo.
For the official record, I loathe moving. Hate it.
You and me both. It was 9 years in this apartment for me, in this condo for me.
So you had way more stuff than you should have.
We collect things, and I don't know how. And
it's crazy.
I'll tell you, the craziest part was the amount of electronics that I was just trying to, how do I get rid of these?
Right.
Because this plug doesn't exist anymore. Or this outlet doesn't exist. All of those things. It was interesting. On a positive note about the move, the Vino Veritas Society came through for me this weekend.
Oh, yeah?
I had 6 or 7 members, 6 or 7 guardians of the Vino Veritas Society who showed up and helped me move over the weekend.
Oh, wow. That's impressive. That's like a real test of friendship there.
You talk about building trust and building community.
Yeah.
I owe these guys more than anything I could ever imagine.
Move. I mean, it's one thing to show up like to eat someone's food or drink their whiskey, but they came to help you move.
They came to help me move.
Wow.
Not only did they just show up, they crushed it.
Right.
And what's funny is there was one friend who didn't show up.
Yeah.
And that friend is not in the Vino Veritas Society. So it just goes to show.
You might send them our flashcards that have our virtues listed on it.
There you go. At the same time, I did do one fun thing. You talk about this weekend being somewhat of a down holiday. It's not necessarily
it's
something
solemn,
it's solemn.
Yeah.
There was a celebration of a fallen Air Force pilot, or a fake Air Force pilot, Goose from the movie Top Gun. I went and saw the new movie Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah, okay.
And
wonderful.
It was great. It was a lot of fun.
I can remember like yesterday when the original one came. I was in high school. Yeah,
I
it was
actually,
a big deal.
That was the first R-rated movie I saw in the theaters.
Was that R-rated?
Yeah.
What made? I don't remember. Was there sex in there? I honestly don't remember.
There was the sex scene. You didn't really see anything, but there was the sex scene with Kelly McGillis.
Oh yeah.
And there was a lot of
I thought she was really
and
cute in the first movie.
Does she
make an appearance in the second one?
She does not. I don't know if you've seen pictures of Kelly McGillis.
No.
Today.
No.
Kelly McGillis looks very old.
Oh, no.
Kelly McGillis also looks like your second grade teacher. Very short gray hair.
Oh.
She's gained some weight.
Yeah.
She looks like a school marm. She does not look like the sexible she was.
She hasn't been preserved as well as Tom Cruise has.
Apparently. I don't know if that's Hollywood or Scientology or some kind of combination of both. But yeah, so great movie. A couple little political interesting things about the movie. One was they made a big deal about Tom Cruise's bomber jacket. There was a lot of nostalgia in the movie. The movie, it had its plot holes and everything else, but it was a perfect sequel to Top Gun.
Right.
But he had his old bomber jacket that he liked to wear, and for a guy who rides motorcycles and flies airplanes, and you wear a bomber jacket. Well, there was a big deal made before this movie that the bomber jacket had a Taiwanese flag right at the base of the neck, right in the middle of his back.
Okay.
And today Hollywood makes a lot of their movies for China.
I see the problem there.
And you can't.
China doesn't want that Taiwan flag.
So the Chinese government, the CCP, actually called and said, "You need to. This can't be on his jacket. You need to refilm."
According to them, Taiwan's part of China.
Right. So they shouldn't have their own flag.
Right.
So they ended up leaving it in the movie, and they put it in there. So I thought that was I was happy to see that.
Yeah, that is a good thing. It's also, isn't that it's fascinating. The Western world is filled with so many people who basically think that the problem of government is over. What I mean by that statement is we have millions of people who think governments are no longer problems.
Right.
Whatever problems they used to have, and waging wars on their own people and things like that. Whatever problems government had, that's all in the past. And yet we have Russia right now is killing lots of people in Ukraine, saying this is really a part of our country. This is part of Mother Russia. Yeah. You have China not doing the same thing yet, but over there, right, say denying that Taiwan is an independent sovereign nation, right? And so what it shows is that problem of government never goes away.
Never goes away.
Never goes away.
And here's what's another interesting thing about this movie. And it was pointed out by the director. I watched an interview, and he pointed out about this movie and about the original. And he kept this theme going from the original. And I didn't really remember it from the first one. Was it 27 years ago?
Something like that, yeah.
1985, 86, 87, something like that. Anyway, the first one, they never actually reference who the enemy country is. Now they call them MiGs.
Yeah.
They say the enemy fighters. But they never say what country it is.
Right.
It's MiGs, and they've got that red star on their helmet.
And they refer to bogeys, right?
Right. So you kind of assume it's Russia throughout the movie,
but you don't actually know.
But they never actually say it, and they do the same thing in this one. They never actually say who the enemy is. Most people have said it's Iran.
Not quite as directly. Do you remember the old Red Dawn movie?
Red Dawn or Hunt for Red October.
Right. There was no question there.
There is no question. In this one, they again do the same thing. Now, a lot of people have said Iran. I could actually make the argument that this was China. And right. I think there's going to be an interesting conversation about it. It was almost as if we were fighting a war in this movie against China, and that's a really interesting kind of conversation. Now, most people will tell me, no, you're wrong. It was definitely Iran. If you want to have that conversation in a forum on our website, I'd be happy to debate that. But good movie overall, really cool effects. Also
I'm assuming you see lots of great airplanes and all that kind of stuff.
Great
right?
airplanes. Yeah. I was talking to a friend. If you're a business and you own billion-dollar jets, you're probably one of very few who owns billion-dollar fighter jets. Right? So low supply, when there's demand for anything like that,
price is high.
Yeah. So you'd assume the Air Force is going to charge a lot of money, or the Navy in this case, is going to charge a lot of money to actually fly in these scenes. Well, it's the U.S. government, so they just charge what do we want to get for this?
Right.
Or what turned out to be $11,000 an hour for the filming of the flights of the jet flying in the movie.
That's not a bad deal.
It seems really low to me.
Yeah.
My takeaway from that was that sounds really low. I would have thought 11 million an hour,
right? Especially
for a huge Hollywood movie,
right?
That made 150 million plus on opening weekend. It was the biggest Memorial Day weekend movie ever. And they charged $11,000 an hour. I'm guessing all in all, they're probably somewhere 25 hours of flight time to get the few clips that they need.
Yeah.
It's not that much money for a big Hollywood mega movie.
Well, we know the U.S. government has never been interested in making a profit, right? Or being efficient or productive or anything
it's the
like
efficient.
that.
I mean, somebody's getting paid for it, but it's us, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's right.
To an extent, the taxpayers footed the bill for this movie, so it better have been good.
Well, while you were watching movies, I was trying to finish a case study.
Right.
For next week. We're coming up on June, so we thought it was fitting to produce a case study on Juneteenth. And there's a little bit of this case study has a little bit of an edge to it. Might be a little controversial. Juneteenth, for those who don't remember, the date is a celebratory name. They combine June 19th, which is the date, June 19th of 1865. That's when the Union Army finally arrived in South Texas, Galveston, which is a little island, maybe, 60, 70 miles straight south of Houston.
Mm-hmm.
And when they showed up, so think of what was going on. June, that's the summer of 1865. That's 2.5 months after Robert E. Lee had already surrendered to Grant at Appomattox, at the Appomattox Courthouse. Lincoln is dead. He's been assassinated. Lincoln had, as president, he had issued the Emancipation Proclamation 2.5 years earlier, January 1st of 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation itself is controversial. I spent quite a bit of ink in my book, Vindicating Lincoln, talking about the Emancipation Proclamation and some of the controversies around it. In my opinion, the best, the most authoritative, and really the most beautifully written book-length treatment of the Emancipation Proclamation is Allen Gelsow's book, just titled The Emancipation Proclamation. It's fantastic. It is a real work of art. Lincoln, when he came in as president, he had been reassuring the southern states over and over. He said, look, you have nothing to fear from the federal government. The federal government isn't violating it's not treading on the turf of South Carolina or Alabama or Virginia or Mississippi or any of those southern states. And he is president. He acknowledged over and over he didn't have any power to do anything about slavery. Slavery was entirely a creature of state laws. It was up to each state to decide what to do with whether to have slavery or prohibit slavery until the Civil War, until South Carolina opens fire on Fort Sumter. And Lincoln sees that as an attack on the federal government. He then views the Civil War as open rebellion, and in a war crisis moment, the president has constitutional war powers.
Right.
A whole subject that's highly debatable, and lots of scholars do debate that. But this is how Lincoln justifies the Emancipation Proclamation as an emergency war measure that's part of his power as commander-in-chief. And the terms of the Emancipation Proclamation, it only applies to slaves because it's a war measure. It only applies to slaves in states that are in open rebellion.
Got it.
And there were 4 states that were not in open rebellion, 4 slave states. Maryland, Delaware, Kentucky, and Missouri were slave states that never claimed to secede from the Union. They still had their representatives and their senators, right, in Congress. They were part of the Union. And so the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to the slaves in those states. Now, there also weren't very many, but the principle was it didn't apply to them. It did apply to all the states that were part of the Confederacy. That included Texas. Texas was the westernmost state in the Confederacy. And so it took a long time for the Union Army to actually get out there. And when they get out there, the slaves there didn't know that they had been freed.
Right.
And the Union Army announces that by way of Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, they were free. This is in the summer of 65. Just a few months later, in December, we would have the requisite number of states that would pass the 13th Amendment and constitutionally abolish slavery throughout the entire United States. But here's the point about Juneteenth. Juneteenth is it's a celebration of freedom. It is this moment where a group of slaves learn of their freedom, which is one of the reasons people have been celebrating it since 1865. Initially, it was just local celebrations, sometimes within families. States started adopting legislation to have it as a state holiday. It became a federal holiday last year.
Real quick, you talk about them learning that they were free. I would encourage our members. It's interesting. We've been doing this a while now. This is podcast 105.
Right.
We're now at a point where we're repeating holidays. Right. We're covering holidays over and over. We did a Juneteenth episode last year. And we talked about Juneteenth and compared it to the Ethiopian Jews.
Oh yeah, right.
Yes. I don't want us to spend a whole lot of time today talking about sort of that timeline and how long it took for them to actually find out. But we spent a lot of time on that podcast talking about it. And I'd encourage people as we go through this case study, and they'll listen to this podcast, but go back and listen to the Juneteenth one from last year as well.
And and here's the point of our case study. I'm going to be real frank here. There are large numbers of conservatives, Republicans who seem to be a little uneasy about Juneteenth. They don't actively oppose Juneteenth. They're just kind of quiet. I think they feel uncomfortable talking about Juneteenth. I think a lot of Republicans assume, well, that must be some progressive celebration. That must be a Democrat thing because that's who talks about Juneteenth.
Right.
And yet this is a Republican victory for freedom. This is a victory for freedom. It's a celebration of freedom made possible by Republicans.
It's also a victory for the ideals, the idea of America, of the United States of America.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We make this case in the case study, and it's worth saying it here in the podcast. There would have been no Juneteenth. Juneteenth never would have happened without the Emancipation Proclamation.
Mm-hmm.
There would have been no Emancipation Proclamation if Abraham Lincoln had not been elected president of the United States. And Abraham Lincoln never would have been elected if it wasn't for the formation, the creation of the Republican Party. He, of course, is the first Republican elected president. That party is what elevates him. It makes it possible. The Whig Party had dissolved. The Democratic Party had become the national pro-slavery party in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
There was no chance for Lincoln getting elected president if it wasn't for the Republican Party. And so, here's the crazy thing, Dave. I mentioned before that states started adopting Juneteenth as a state holiday. And the first state that adopted legislation officially declaring Juneteenth as a state holiday was Texas.
Right.
And this is all the way back it's either 1969 or 1970. And you know who wrote that legislation in Texas and pushed it through the state legislature there? A group of Democrats.
Right.
That's fascinating to me. Democrats were taking ownership of Juneteenth, which was made possible by Republican President Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party that also helped form the Union Army, right? That secured these victories. And it raises in my mind this question: why hadn't Republicans made that a big holiday, state holiday,
Sure.
national holiday, decades earlier, generations earlier, right? I mean, they should have said, look, this great thing happened on June 19th in 1865, and the last people who were slaves in the United States become aware of their freedom, and they celebrate and we're going to celebrate their freedom with them because it's a wonderful thing. And along the way, if Republicans were smart, they could have branded, right, that reminded people, hey, this was made possible
Sure.
by the Republican Party, and they never did that. And today we sit here and Republicans feel uneasy talking about slavery and race and Juneteenth and related things.
Well, this goes back to why people buy into this myth of the party switch.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it starts with LBJ, and it's no wonder that this would happen in Texas, where LBJ is from. And these are his guys in Texas saying, hey, wait a minute. We just spent the latter half of the 60s convincing Black people that we have their best interest at heart. Right. I mean, they just wanted votes. LBJ said it himself.
Let's be really clear. This was the real switch. There was a switch, and the switch was within the Democratic Party.
Correct.
Democrats went from saying, let's enslave and terrorize and torture Blacks to let's bribe them and let's offer them some affirmative action and some special privileges. And in the words of LBJ, we'll have those Negroes voting Democrat for 200 years.
Only he didn't use the word Negroes.
No.
And if any progressive, if anybody's listening to this and says, well, how do I respond to my progressive friends who say that's not true, the
Right.
party switch? Say, so you disavow everything FDR stood for, right? Because that happened to be, FDR
Right.
was in office before that, right?
Right.
So you disavow everything FDR and Woodrow Wilson
Right.
stood for, and you want something totally different, right? The
Right.
party switched and you want something.
Right.
Guarantee you there's not a single progressive on this planet who's going to say, oh no, I don't like FDR at all. I mean, they all love him. He's their hero.
Yeah, you make this point very well. If the parties really did switch in the 60s, then the Democrat Party that used to be the party of the New Deal,
Mhm.
the party of subsidies, the party of regulations, the parties of big government bureaucracies and agencies controlling everything, if that's the old Democratic Party and there was a switch, well, then you would expect the new Democratic Party
Right.
would be for something different. And yet when Joe Biden was elected president, right, there were all kinds of journalists heralding him as the new Franklin Roosevelt.
Right. The heir to FDR.
The heir to FDR. I think that was even the title.
It was
in
either the New York
Times
Times
Yeah.
or Time Magazine
Yeah.
did an article called
Right.
Joe Biden is the heir to Franklin Roosevelt.
And so the point is, there's a direct line, right? The Democratic Party is consistent from the 1930s through the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way up to today. There's no switch of the parties. What there was a switch within the Democratic Party of how they were going to treat Black Americans. Right. And it went from, let's just treat them overtly in unjust, terrible way, it literally in terrorist ways, with Jim Crow and the Ku Klux Klan and all these agencies of the Democratic Party, to, well, we'll bribe them and woo them and try to offer them some special privileges. I guess here's the point of this case study. And I really encourage our members to spend some time looking at it, talking about it. The Republican Party, like any political party, look, it's a human organization. It's filled with people, and very flawed people. And you know, political organizations attract a lot of volunteers and these types, people who may not be very serious. Some might be real serious and others might not be very serious. And so it's not like the entire history of the Republican Party is perfect. It's not.
Right.
It's not. It has, Republicans have done things they shouldn't have done. There's no question about that. It is also true that within that story of the Republican Party, there are moments that are beautiful.
Yep.
There are moments where the Republican Party did some noble things. The one that shines the most is abolishing slavery. The Republicans are the ones who secure victory in the Civil War. The Republicans make Juneteenth possible. The Republicans get through the 13th Amendment, which constitutionally abolishes slavery throughout the United States. And the purpose of this case study, it really is pointed at Republican and saying, hey, Republicans, know more about yourselves, know more about your own party, know more about your own story, because it is compelling, it's interesting, it's wonderful. You shouldn't cower from discussions that involve slavery and racism and Juneteenth and, you know, related subjects. You shouldn't cower away from those. You should be leading those conversations. You should be starting those conversations, because they're great conversations to have.
It's really such a good point. And it's amazing because the Republican Party has so many beautiful stories like that. And then you have the Democrat Party, and they've got the opposite. You know, you just start by comparing the first Democrat president versus the first Republican president. Look at the amazing things that Abraham Lincoln accomplished. Look at the horrific things that Andrew Jackson did to this country and did to the people living on the land here. I mean, you have progressives today talking about Native Americans and this and that.
Right.
Meanwhile, it was the first Democrat president who wanted to go out and massacre Indians on large scales
and drive them clear across the country, clear across the continent. Right. You go march out to Oklahoma, you Indians, and a bunch of them die along. I mean, the whole Trail of Tears is just one of the saddest, you know, moments in American history. That is courtesy of Andrew Jackson.
And meanwhile, you have Abraham Lincoln, who is trying to carry us forward towards the ideals of and the ideas contained in the Declaration of Independence, and that beautiful, perfect message that the Declaration says, and it's something we should be proud of, and it's something that we need to be better at helping our fellow friends and guardians within the Vino Veritas Society really understand and know how to talk about and feel confident in talking about.
Absolutely. So, you know, it is an interesting coincidence here. We're talking about Juneteenth, which happens in Galveston, Texas, when the Union Army shows up there and announces to slaves that they're no longer slaves. They're free people. And Texas was the scene of yet another one of these horrific mass murders. I almost am reluctant to call these things mass shootings, because it somehow diminishes the fact that these are mass murders.
I think it's a really good clarification.
You know, no matter what the weapon of choice, they're murders. That's what's happening. And you know, in an elementary school involving a bunch of little kids and teachers, and there's so much to talk about here, and we will talk about it. Maybe a place to begin is to just give some context to these random mass murders. When you look at criminology statistics, which I do, they have very specific language for these things. They usually call them public mass shootings. And what they mean by that is They're mass if they include 4 people, 4 victims or more, not including the murderer himself.
Right.
And they have to happen within a certain short period of time because it doesn't include like serial murderers who might murder 5, 10, 15 people, but over many months or many years. That right. They're talking about when someone goes in one moment, one episode, and murders and kills large numbers of people. Now, over the last 20 years, homicide rates in the United States have been going down. That's the good news. They actually have been going down. Usually they're measured in numbers of homicides per 1,000 citizens, and that rate has been going down. That's good.
It is good. It would be an interesting statistic to do a deep dive into. I'd be really curious what those statistics actually show. Is it increase in population? Are we looking at certain city centers? Are we seeing advances? We just did last week's podcast. We just talked about advancement in medicine and advancements there. It would be really interesting to know what the core cause of all of that is. But yes, I mean, on the whole, those homicides are going down.
The thing that is going up are rates of these random mass murders or mass shootings as they're categorized. These moments where some individual walks into a school or sometimes a grocery store or other or a concert, right? I'm thinking of the guy out in Las Vegas, right? What he got a hotel room overlooking a big music festival. The point is these are venues where there are large numbers of people together, and someone just starts shooting strangers. There's a kind of pathology to this that, even murders committed out of revenge, right? Deep hatred, even those murders aren't justified, but one can kind of understand them, right? If someone has been deeply wronged by someone or perceives that they've been deeply wronged and they want to get revenge, I think people can understand how those things happen, what motivates someone like that. But what we see in the modern era, especially, really ever since Columbine, are these murders where the victims are unknown to the murderer. The murderer is just trying to kill as many people as possible, total strangers. And, one of the big questions that we have to address, and we'll come back to this, what kind of culture is it? What kind of people produce a generation where there are so many who want to go murder strangers? Almost nobody talks about that. Every time one of these things happen, they don't talk about that. What is it in these people, in their mind, in their heart, in their soul? What is it that makes them want to go murder strangers? As many as they can, many of them going in knowing this is going to be a suicide moment for themselves. They're going to keep shooting and keep murdering until they get mowed down.
Right. It's interesting. I'm thinking this through a little bit on the fly because I haven't really thought through what you were talking about from a motive standpoint earlier.
Yeah.
You talked about when you think somebody has been wronged, it's still wrong, right? You don't go murder somebody. Right. That is a violation of the natural right of the natural law.
Absolutely.
You do not do that.
Right.
However, you talk about motive, and there comes a point where people start to justify motive when they don't want the mass murder of people to be in conflict with their political leanings.
Yeah.
And when you said that, it hit me a little bit personally in a way that I never thought about before. But to me, there is very little difference between what happened in Uvalde, Texas, or what happened at Columbine, or what happened in the shopping center in Buffalo,
right?
Just recently,
or the many other instances, the many in others, between, right?
Or what happens in Israel on almost a weekly basis, the mass murder of strangers, of Israelis, and what you hear from an AOC, a Rashida Tlaib. Israel is hurting these people, and they are justified in doing that, and they're justifying it in a way that suits their political narrative. And in this case, they don't want to justify this. They don't want to try. They just say, "Oh, this was a mass killing. That was the guns' fault. This is the fault of guns." Whereas they don't really talk about that. They say, no, this is there's a motive there. They're angry.
You're making a great point, because you never hear, whether it's from journalists writing for Israeli press or from various Arab or Muslim outlets, you never hear anyone say, let's have more regulations on rockets.
Right.
That's what they're using. Or bombs
or swords or knives or anything else.
You don't, man, if we just had some common sense regulations on rockets, right?
Yeah.
You just don't hear that, because instead they focus entirely on motive. And, allegedly progressive Americans who have a real beef with really any amount of freedom anywhere. So Israel, which is actually a very progressive nation. They have a very developed welfare regulatory state, right? But they're still too free. There's still some sense of freedom in Israel, and American progressives don't like that. So when there's a bomb that goes off, when a rocket destroys an Israeli school and kills a bunch of kids, these things happen. American progressives say, well, the only thing that matters are the motives. Why did those Arabs bomb, send rockets into Israel? Oh, it's this political conflict, and we don't need to go into all the geopolitics there of that old conflict, but that is the focus.
Right.
Contrast that with the way those same progressive Americans, when someone walks into a school and just opens fire, murders, a dozen and a half little children, there's almost nothing said about motive. Virtually nothing. Why? And not always, but often these murderers are kind of young people. There are exceptions, right? So I don't want to make too big of a point of, but it's both fascinating and frightening and terribly sad. What is it about these young people who want to go slaughter as many strangers as possible? What kind of nihilistic,
that's it,
purposeless, right, cult of death are they surrounded by that has them seeking out these kinds of things? Instead, all we hear, the moment these things happen, all we hear are renewed calls for more gun laws, more gun regulations, guns are the problem. It is all talk about guns all the time. Turn on CNN, turn on MSNBC, right? Open the pages of the Washington Post. It's all guns all the time.
Look at did you see the Beto O'Rourke interruption?
Yeah.
At the press conference. He didn't go in there saying, why did this happen?
Right.
We need an investigation to find out why this kid, what was it about this kid? Because you know what? It would have turned on Beto and his progressive friends.
Right.
It would have turned on them for being the ones to turn him into a nihilist.
Well, this is a message I've been driving home for a long time now. So I've been watching these things happen for a long time, and I am horrified by them. I despise when these things happen. I despise the people who commit these kinds of injustices. They're the equivalent of a moral monster. And I've been pointing out, look, we live today. I think this point is beyond dispute. In fact, I would challenge any of our leftist progressive friends to try to challenge this. Here's the point that's beyond dispute. We are more progressive today in America than ever before in American history.
Absolutely.
When would we have been more? We have more regulations. We have more subsidies. We have more government control. Progressivism, wokeness, leftism is in corporate boardrooms more than ever before. It's in sports, right? You can't even watch you can't watch a sporting event anymore without just getting hammered with progressive messages over and over and over. It's in our culture. It's in movies. It's in the curriculum in schools across the country.
That's one of the most important things. It is so deeply ingrained. We are generations ingrained of progressive education, where progressives educated new progressives who educated new progressives who educated new progressives. It's so deeply ingrained into our education system.
I saw a little meme, and I'm going to botch this because I didn't pay that much attention, but it's some guy watching TV, and on the TV you read what the announcer is saying, and he's saying, "Welcome to our program." The title of the program is something like "All Angles on the News." That's the title of the program. Yeah. And our special panel is a communist, a leftist, a progressive, and a socialist, right? Like that's our diverse panel, right? When they're all basically the same.
Right. They might have different skin color, but their ideas are all exactly the same.
That's right. We have a white communist and a black progressive, and see that great diversity. And it's everywhere around us today. It's in our churches, it's in our synagogues, it's everywhere. And at this moment where progressives should be celebrating a great victory for themselves, they should say, hey, we've won. We have dominated and we now control America, because in many ways they do. Mm-hmm. We have more people than ever before who want to go out and murder as many strangers as possible. And so I think it's not only a legitimate question, a fair question to ask, it might be the most important question to ask. Why? What is it about the progressive era that we live in, the progressive environment and culture we live in? What's the connection between that and these people who want to go out and murder strangers? And while that's the important question, instead we're always distracted by all these, we need more regulations on guns. Now, here's the thing. We just had a big controversy. Somebody, I don't think this has been discovered yet, there was a leak at the Supreme Court over this opinion about abortion. And it's fascinating to me that the very same progressives who say, well, it doesn't matter if you prohibit abortion or if you pass more regulations, there's still going to be abortions. Lots of them. They'll go get them in alleys, right? And with quack doctors using clothes hangers, right? And all the it's still, regulations are not going to stop it. Laws are not going to, it's going to happen. And then you turn the subject to guns, and apparently they think guns are somehow different.
Right.
Well, laws against guns will just get rid of guns. Just regulations, they'll just get rid. There just will not be any more guns.
Just like the war on drugs.
Right. Pass the law against drugs, and drugs will just disappear, right? Never mind the fact that we have far more people using far more drugs right now today in the United States than ever before. And if you spend even just 10 or 20 seconds reconciling your mind to that fact, that even with some regulations, even with some laws, there's still going to be lots of guns and other kinds of weapons. And therefore, there will still be the threat of a murderer getting into a school or a shopping mall or a grocery store or sporting event or a concert or some other place, right? Somewhere to murder random strangers. What are you going to do? And we know right now the pattern is to focus on the schools. So, okay, what can we do to protect little kids in schools? We have a good friend, Laura Carno. She's based here in Colorado. Mm-hmm. She is the director of something called FASTER. It's the Colorado chapter. Right. This is an organization. I know they started in Ohio.
Right.
I don't know how many other states are involved. Eventually, it should be all the states.
Somebody has to defend those children, and as long as there is good training like what we have at FASTER Colorado, what FASTER Saves Lives in Ohio has, really excellent training by law enforcement, they should feel really, really good about that. And by the way, in armed staff programs nationwide, there has never been an injury to any staff member or student, and research shows, this is according to crimeresearch.org, there have been 0 school shootings in schools with armed staff programs. So wow. It works, it's out there, and it's very inexpensive. We, here at FASTER Colorado and in Ohio, FASTER Saves Lives, we would all be happy to walk any school districts nationwide through how we do this here.
And what FASTER does is FASTER goes into school districts. Now here in Colorado, and right, every state has its own policies about this. In Colorado, each school district can choose for itself whether or not to allow teachers and administrators and others in schools to be armed. They do have that option. They can, and many have. And so when a school decides, yes, we want our faculty and staff to be armed, FASTR will come in.
We want to allow those who want to.
And I was going to make that point. FASTR comes in and invites. Is anybody here interested in carrying a weapon? No one's forced to. This is a total myth that, somehow someone's like forcing a teacher to carry a gun who doesn't want to carry nothing. Is anybody here interested? And those who say, yes, I am interested, I would like to do that, then they experience this incredible training. And I've seen the training. I mean, the training is, first of all, they start exactly where they should. They start by orienting, helping these. Sometimes it's teachers, sometimes it's principals. They've had people who work in the kitchen, right? So kitchen aides in some schools are armed and trained, and they start with really basic things like, okay, when one of these events happens, there's going to be tremendous confusion. You're not going to be expecting it. Your mind's going to be on other things, and all of a sudden you're going to hear shooting, or you're going to hear an announcement, right? And here's what to do next. And they repeat this kind of basic training over and over and over. And they call it FASTR because the whole concept is when there's an active murder is happening in a school, time really matters. It really matters. We certainly saw that in Texas when there are cops standing around outside for a better part of an hour. I don't remember, it was a long time. They stood around. Lots of people die in that time period. So this is the idea of FASTR. You have people right there in the school. You don't have to wait for the cops to show up. There's someone who can take action and has some training, has actually extensive training on how to handle these situations. Not all, but some of the schools that go through that FASTR program, they will post signs in the parking lot, in the entrances to all over. There are people here in this school who are both armed and trained on how to deal with some sort of lethal, deadly threat to our students. And what's interesting to me, there's never been a violent attack.
No.
There has never been an accident, not once, at any of these schools. No one's accidentally been shot. And there's never been a violent, murderous assault on the students. And it makes sense, right? Because if you're a lunatic looking to go shoot up as many people as you want, you don't want to walk into a school where you're going to be met with potential deadly force. This is an action. This is a program that goes right to where the problem is. In the school, you have students, you have the potential threat of someone coming into the school and hurting them. And so you surround those students with someone who can bring an end to any possible threat. And that program, by the way, it usually comes with funding. So it is not costing these schools.
Right.
People donate to make this training happen. So the teachers get all this training. That kind of program, progressives tend to have no interest in at all. None. In fact, they'll recoil against it in horror. This is terrible. That means there might be a gun in the school where my kid is. Yes, yes, a gun that might save your kid if there's a deadly murder happening. Instead, they reach for these things that are so far removed from the actual threat. Let's have more regulations. And there are all kinds of regulations right now, as if the regulations are going to stop. Dave, I've been saying this for 30 years, and sometimes I'm embarrassed that I have repeated myself so much, and yet people don't listen, right? We already have laws against murder.
Right.
It is a crime. The person who is willing to break that law and murder, they're not going to care about any gun laws.
No.
They're not going to care about any gun regulations.
And as we've seen in other circumstances, if they can't get their hands on guns and they want to murder people, they're going to find another way to do it. I mean, you go back to Columbine. Let's not forget the guys at Columbine had pipe bombs on them. They made them in their basement.
Yep.
They were walking around that school. They had guns,
yep,
but they also had bombs on them that they were prepared to use that they were ready to go with. We had, you remember the 96, I think it was 96 Atlanta Olympics.
Yes.
Couldn't get a gun into that facility.
Yep. You can get a bomb though.
But guy detonated a pipe bomb in there. How about the Boston Marathon a couple of years ago? Those two guys
cooking pots
used a slow cooker. Used a crock pot type slow cooker and built a bomb out of it. If you want to hurt somebody, we have seen instances over and over the last few years throughout Europe of people using cars and vans and trucks to mow down hundreds of people. If you want to hurt somebody, you're going to find a way to hurt somebody. If you don't believe that you have a natural legal obligation to not murder, you're going to find a way to do it, whether you use a gun or something else.
I wrote a little post on social media just a few days ago, recollecting the horrific genocide in Rwanda. It was in 1994, which is really interesting. This all happened while Bill Clinton was president of the United States. This is the same year. In fact, this would have been at the same time when Bill Clinton was in Ukraine.
I was just thinking that.
Persuading Ukrainians to give up their nuclear warheads while assuring them you will be safe.
Yep.
This will be good for your safety, Ukraine, if you just get rid of all your nuclear warheads. And, look what's going on now. At that same time, in Rwanda, you have two tribes that have ancient hatred towards each other. And the Hutu tribe engages upon a mass organized slaughter of the Tutsis.
Mm-hmm.
And 600,000 people. This is hard to get your mind around. 600,000 people were murdered in 100 days. And the weapon of choice for the Hutus, the machete.
Right.
The machete. Think about it. It's a long knife. And the reason was the machete, they used them for farming. They used them to cut down, big, thick, when you're out in the field and you need to cut down brush, so you use a machete. Machetes were common on farms and in houses and things like that. And that's what they used. And part of that brutal story is hundreds of thousands of Tutsi women and even non-Tutsi women were raped, violently raped, often with, men holding machetes to their throats. And those women being raped, those hundreds of thousands of women being violently, brutally raped at knife point, they had no guns.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they lived in very gun-free zones. Their hut, their little shack that they lived in, there wasn't a gun anywhere around for them to grab to protect. They were utterly defenseless.
Mm-hmm.
And these terrible things happen with knives.
It's an interesting comparison to what we're seeing with Russia and Ukraine today. There was a time where if Russia or another country invaded with a tank, that strength, the mere strength of the tank, you had to combat it with another tank or something stronger.
Right.
The same thing in Rwanda, right? If a big, strong man goes at a woman with a machete, it's going, that woman has to be strong enough to overcome the strength of that man, which is just naturally rare.
And it's one of the reasons many, I've been saying this, but many others have said this is not unique to me in any way. Look, a gun in many respects is a great equalizer because, the strongest, most powerful man around, big, athletic, with a machete, goes after a woman, put a gun in that woman's hand, and instantly things just became even, right? She can take that man down very quickly if she wants to.
And we're seeing the same thing in Ukraine right now with the Javelin missiles. Right?
Yeah.
A single person holding a javelin can fight off a tank.
Right.
And it all of a sudden, it equalizes the two sides.
Yes.
It says, you have a tank, I've got a javelin. Do you really want to do this?
Yes.
It's that mutually assured destruction. I don't care if you're a man or you're a woman, if you're 5 feet and 100 pounds, or you're 6'5" and 250, if you both have a gun, you're both equals.
Yeah.
It creates such a level of deterrence for some of these mass murders.
So, I mean, what we see happening in the United States In many respects, it's almost like a perfectly designed. It wasn't designed, it wasn't controlled, but it looks like a designed and controlled experiment, a sad experiment. Because if you look back over the last 100 years, in some respects, there have been relatively few changes in some gun laws. In other respects, in the ways that gun laws and gun regulations have changed, they've all become more restrictive. Mm-hmm. Certainly, it's not easier than say 100 years ago. Is really easy to go buy. You go buy a Tommy machine gun.
25, 30 years ago it was a whole lot easier.
And so to the degree that they have changed, they've become tighter, more restrictive. Certain kinds of guns are illegal. Other kinds of guns, there are conditions on buying them. And over those decades, as gun laws have tightened, what has happened with things like random mass murder of strangers have gone up. And so when I say that's like a perfect sad experiment, right? I mean, we can look at that and know, well, it's not that laws have become more liberal in the old sense of that word, right? Like they're more permissive, they're looser. That's not what's happening. Something else is going on. A question I genuinely want to ask progressives. Progressives tell us, in fact, some write award-winning, best-selling books saying that what freedom really means is to follow your passion, follow your desires, that your feelings are always right. Whatever your feeling is, that should be the guide to your life. In a way, it's a victory. It's a victory of Rousseau over Aristotle, right?
Sure.
Rousseau says emotions are what's most authentic about us, what's most human about us. Whereas Aristotle said, no, it's your reason. Use your reason to figure out what the right thing is to do, not what you feel like doing. Mm-hmm. And as Rousseau has come to, those ideas have come to dominate our culture, this great emphasis on feeling and emotion and instinct and intuition as our guide. Well, how about these murderers? It seems, I mean, I'm not inside their head, but no one else is either. It seems by watching their actions, they really do feel like murdering.
Sure.
I mean, no one's making them murder. No one's holding a gun to them. Apparently, they have an appetite to murder. They have a desire. They are following their passion. They're doing what they want to do. They're acting in a way that's another big theme of progressivism, cultural progressivism over the last 30 years has been, don't conform with traditional morality, with traditional mores. Mm-hmm. Find your own way, follow your own path, be true to yourself, right? Mm-hmm. All these kinds of progressive saying. Well, how about these murderers? Are they being true to themselves? Are they finding their own way? Are they being nonconformist with traditional morality? It seems so. So when you look at all the slogans and teachings that are popular within cultural progressivism, and then you raise the subject of these murderers, you say, it seems to me they're being perfect progressives.
Yeah.
They're actually they are doing what progressives have been teaching people to do. Why is anybody surprised? Now, I'm confident most progressives will say, no. We're not talking about that. We don't want people to go murder. Well, maybe you don't want people to go murder, but that's the consequence, right? You are telling people there's no right and wrong. There's no objective moral truth. Your subjective feelings and prejudices and perspectives, that's the ultimate guide for you. Right. Do what you feel like doing. I think when many progressives think that, they assume, well, that means, right, like picking the college you really want to go to, or getting the job you really want, or hey, if you're gay, go find someone of your own sex. Don't follow traditional customs and marry someone. That's what they're thinking. But that's because they don't think in terms of principles and models. They don't carry that thought of do whatever you want to do to the kid who's sitting there thinking, right? He's not thinking, I want to go marry someone of my same sex, or I want to go to this college, not that college. He's thinking, I want to murder.
I'm glad you qualified that with most progressives, because it's not all. And there is a portion of of progressives out there who talk about things like overpopulation and say we should have You should have there should be forced euthanasia at a certain age. You talk about the world falling, that the world is going to be destroyed within 12 years, right? Because of climate change. So what's the point in living? What's the point in pursuing productivity? What's the point in pursuing relationships and friendships and all of that? If the world's going to end in 12 years, is he really doing anything wrong in his mind?
In fact, not only what's the point, right? It's actually shameful to be alive. It's shameful to be alive.
And with some of those conversations that you hear from progressives, he's actually being a good, true progressive. They're not just talking about go to the college you want, get the job you want. In certain circumstances, among a lot of them, there might have been somebody of a race. There might have been an Israeli in that classroom, and you hear all this this BDS anti-Israel movement. I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to go kill that person. And if all these other people die along the way, so be it.
I do know this, just because I've looked at the survey work on this. There are young Americans right now today who will say, when asked, that the most important, the best thing they can do with their life is to die.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they die, it's good for the earth. They will. That's the ultimate reduction of one's carbon footprint, right? Just die.
Yep.
Then you don't have a carbon footprint anymore, and you're not going to use any resources, right? And all that sort of thing. I mean, combine that idea that your life is bad because it's bad for the environment. It's bad for the earth. Combine that with, we have a culture now that openly celebrates the killing of unborn children openly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are, look, let's just be, if any progressives hearing this right now will immediately be shrugging their shoulders and rolling their eyes. And yet they can't refute this. There are millions of Americans who will say, when more unborn children are being killed, it's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing. That means women are liberated, right? And when there are fewer unborn children being killed in the womb, that's bad.
Right.
That's bad. Children are going to live. That's bad. And then tie that to the progressive euthanasia, fascination with euthanasia. People openly talking about, at what age limit should we just start killing people?
Right.
Should it be 80? Should it be 75?
Right.
Maybe 70? There are intellectuals having those kinds of discussions as if this is just a math problem, right?
Yeah.
Let's do the math. Here are the resources. Here are the people. And this will determine when we just start, chopping off heads.
But tie that into the one last piece of progressivism, and that is, you are a snowflake, you are special, you are individual. If you are having a hard time, it's not your fault, it's somebody else's. Everything is somebody else's fault. So what is that kid thinking? Well, we have this overpopulation. I mean, we have seen Facebook posts from this murderer who talked a lot about climate change.
Right.
He believes in this overpopulation and everything else, but he's special, right? Because we tell everybody you're special and you're entitled to certain things. So he shouldn't die. It's everybody else. So I need to go do my job as a good progressive and go decrease the population. And that's where this gets really, really scary.
So add all those things together. I mean this in a serious way. Like this, I'm not just being flippant about this. I want listeners to really think about this. Is anyone truly surprised or shocked that we have a generation of Americans who are depressed, who are caught up in some kind of terrible angst and inner conflict and inner turmoil? And they've been taught over and over and over, right? There is no good way of life. Your good way of life is whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
That's your good way. There is no one good way that you should learn about and try to emulate and live. No, it's whatever you want, whatever you feel at the moment. There's no right and wrong. There's no way to judge between competing claims of what is just, what is fair. Hey, there's just different perspectives, which means in the end, there's really just power.
Right.
That's all that there really is. This is now in our air, our water. It's everywhere in our culture around us. And yet, I don't know, 100 million or more Americans are still surprised that some of these nihilistic Americans, just filled with angst and depression and have really no purpose in their life, they have no meaning, want to go out there and murder.
Right.
It doesn't surprise me. I hate it, but it doesn't shock me or surprise me. And I'm confident, not just is there's going to be more, it's going to be a lot more.
Right.
Before this starts going away.
Well, and you ask, why are you surprised? And I have that same question. I don't want to diminish that at all. I have that very same question. I have another question. Do you really care? Why do you care? And I say, do you really care? Because we don't hear the president come out and talk about the 30 to 50 people shot in Chicago every weekend.
Right.
We don't hear them talking about the number of murders that are happening all over Democrat-run cities, progressive cities all over this country. We never hear them come out and talk about that.
Yes.
But we hear them come out when there's an opportunity to increase government authority, increase the government say, increase gun control, diminish the Constitution, diminish the Declaration, the ideas of America. As anytime they can do that, anytime they can use one of these events to do that, we hear from them. We don't hear from them when we hear about all the shootings in Chicago. We don't hear from them. Where has our governor in Colorado been with all of the violence and all of the theft and everything happening in this state? Every day, and yet we hear nothing. Why? Because they don't really care.
Well, honestly, what it means, your remarks are just spot on. It means at the best, progressives are just opportunists. And so they look at these events, many of them blood-soaked and involving murder and terrible injustices, and then they cherry pick the ones that serve their political cause, their political agenda of the day. That's what they want to talk about. At the best. At the worst, they just really don't care about human life or death. There really is a nihilism that's just eating away within them, and they see really no ultimate purpose to anything. You know, I've told this story before. I think I told it in a lighter environment, so it probably had a very different flavor to it. My teacher in graduate school, Harry Newman, was a tremendous scholar of Nietzsche.
Right.
Now he's fascinating because he grew up with Orthodox Jewish grandparents with whom he was very close.
Mm-hmm.
They were a huge influence on his life. And so, you know, that contrast, I think that was part of what attracted him. First attracted him to Nietzsche, and then studying Nietzsche attracted him more to his grandparents' orthodoxy, because one is a life of purpose, of meaning, of ultimate truth, and the other is a world of literal nothingness. Nothing has a meaning or purpose. And so here is this man, this mind, this thinker, trying to understand these are ultimate human subjects, right? Is there a purpose to our life? Is there purpose in the universe, or is it just a big void? And this was shortly after the Kent State shootings, and there was violence on the campus of the Claremont colleges, a bunch of student uprising. This was all in protest to the Vietnam War, and some students had planted some bombs, some package bombs. One secretary had an arm blown off when she opened one of these bombs. They had burned some buildings. So they had a Saturday morning. This is a very unusual thing, an emergency meeting of all the faculty. And everyone's wringing their hands. We have this violence. People have been hurt. They didn't want the National Guard getting called in to Claremont the way that it had at Kent State. All that's going on. And Harry Newman stands up, and he's a young professor, just been tenured, teacher of Nietzsche. And he says, I don't understand why you're all so worried. You're acting as if the lives of our students and others have some kind of meaning or purpose. And yet you are all a bunch of nihilistic progressive academics. You go teach your students every day. You in the English department, he's pointing out people, you in the history department, you go teach your students that there is no right and wrong, that there is no truth, that there's no reason to prefer life over death or death over life. So why should we care if soldiers get called here and they come shoot our students? Now, he was trying to drive home a point, right? Like, he was trying to say, this is what you people teach. He wasn't even agreeing with them. He's just saying, this is what you teach. He was confronting them with their own teaching. Now, they dismissed him, right? Well, you're a wacko. You're a lunatic. Didn't you hear that buildings have been burned and people are getting hurt? Right? And he was like, yeah, I did hear. You're not hearing me. According to your own teaching, we shouldn't care. There's no reason to care. And Harry Newman's point in that emergency faculty meeting there in the Claremont colleges, his point is now resonating. It's being amplified. Absolutely. Throughout the world, because this is not just some violence confined to one little college, liberal arts college campus. This is happening all over the country, and progressives want to say, well, this is outrageous. Well, why? Why is it outrageous? The shooter didn't think it was outrageous, and you know who he learned from? He learned from you. He learned from you progressives. You taught him that there's no right and there's no wrong.
And let's not pretend this is only happening across this country. Right. We're seeing mass murders all over the world in progressive countries.
Yeah.
In where progressivism is rampant,
right?
We are seeing mass murders on a regular basis in some form or fashion.
And other forms of violence, right? You're seeing in England, in London, spike in stabbings and things like that. And also many of the other pathologies, right? This is one pathology we're talking about, social pathology. There's a whole family of pathologies that have been bubbling up, and they're starting to spill over. I mean, we not only have these random mass murders right now at the most progressive time in American history, which is also the most progressive moment in European history, right? Really in the Western developed world, where you have all these welfare states, administrative regulatory states, everything is regulated and controlled and mandated. What do you see? You see rates of depression going up, rates of teenage suicide going up, rates of substance abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, all these things, they're all going up. And what will it take? I mean, this is an open-ended question. What will it take for large numbers of people in the modern world to step back and say, whoa, the path we're on is a path to something really bad. Bad things are happening with increasing frequency and intensity. It's time to choose a different way.
Well, but so what you just said is the most important part in everything you just said. And I think it's a perfect place to end on, and we can pick this back up, but you have to choose a different way. And our founders were on to the right way. This country was founded on the right way. If you can't vocalize to somebody what the better way is, I've had these conversations, and people say, well, what's the alternative? What are you going to do? And you have to be able to have that conversation of, what does the American way look like? What does the American idea look like? What did the founders have in mind for this country?
I want to remind people, Dave, we have in the Academy, if you log on to the website, within the Academy section, we have one of our seminars it's a little introduction to citizenship. And in there, we have some flashcards.
Yep.
We've actually boiled down this American way, this American idea, to 6 precepts and 4 virtues. It may not be everything there is to say about this subject, but it is a wonderful core.
It's a great place to start.
It is a great place to start. That is the path.
And that's why we say no sumus custodes. That's why we are here to guard the American idea.